In this movie, we're going to be talking about the prototyping workflow. The first step is always going to be design. Now, design can be something that could take years and have a huge team of hundreds of designers working on it, or it can be something you can conceive of in the morning, draw it up in your computer in the afternoon, and by that evening, you could be 3D printing that part and working through a design process. So again, design is going to be the key first step, conceiving that idea. And 90% of most designs are thinking about it in your head or sketching it up and then bringing it into the computer. So the computer software is really not as important as the idea itself, but there's a lot of different choices for software. We need to get it into the computer so we can 3D print it or machine it or resin cast it or injection mold it. Any of those processes we're going to be looking at in this course, they're all going to need to use a part that is designed inside of the computer. So design it on a sketch pad first, get it into computer. You can download software for free. You might have to go through a little learning process to get there, or you can hire designers or something like that to design the part for you so you can go through the prototyping steps. But anyways, first step is going to be design. Step 2 is going to be building a prototype. In this course, we're looking at a bunch of different processes for building prototypes. And that's the key point. Get something prototyped as sooner than later, because a lot of times you're going to be finding problems in your design right off the bat. So you don't want to go through and spend extra amounts of time in the design process only to find out later when you build a prototype that, wow, this thing's completely the wrong size or there's some other major issue. So, get a good design going, prototype as soon as you can, and then go through that process. The first thing you're going to do when you get done with that prototype is test it. Hey, does this thing fit? Does it form the correct shape? Is it function what I'm expecting it to do? Now, a lot of times you can't get exact functional tests with a 3D printed part, for instance, or even a 2D part, but you can at least get the size and shape and then work through, hey, does this thing look like it might work? And you can run maybe some analysis in the computer to see if it's going to function correctly. But getting to that first testing phase is really important. Now, whatever you learn in the testing phase, you're going to go back and you're going to update that design and incorporate those changes, incorporate the different look, the feel of the part, and go through that process several times, maybe just one time, maybe hundreds of times, who knows? But you're going to be going through the design, prototype, and testing phase until you've got your part correct. Once you've updated the design, now we're going to jump into a better prototype. So do I want to use the same process? Maybe I want to go to the next level up. So maybe an example would be your first prototype might just be printing it out in full size on a piece of paper and making sure that's the correct dimensions and it's going to work or it's going to fit up with another part. The second time you go through it, maybe you're going to 3D print that part or you're going to CNC machine that part. And maybe the third time through, you might make a resin casting of it or, go to injection molding or a prototype injection molding. It really depends on what your end goal of your final part's going to be. I mean, at the end of the day, if this is going to be an injection molded part, you're going to want to get to that prototype tooling sooner than later with that final part. Whereas some other designs might be just a machine part. It's going to end up as a CNC machined part in production. In that case, maybe 3D print would be great, or you might just want to skip the 3D printing process altogether and go right to CNC machining in a prototype environment that you can modify that part as you're working with it. And the cool thing about going to CNC machining right away is you can actually start using that part and seeing if it's going to provide all the functionality right off the bat when you have the part. And, said you can always put it back in the machine and machine away a little bit more. Generally, you're going to have a little bit higher cost going straight to a CNC machine, but depends on what your environment is. If you have access to a CNC or you're working in a company that already has some of that functionality, you can kind of iterate the process there by going to that process. It really depends on what your final production method is going to be, is how you choose your prototyping processes. Now, once you're done with that, we're going to, again, test that part. So this is where you're going to, again, test the part as far as, is it strong enough, it's big enough, the right thing. But you're also going to start looking at things like aesthetics. Hey, what color should we paint this thing? Or what color should we make it? What kind of production issues are we going to have? I mean, what materials is it going to come out of? And what material are we going to choose to machine it from or finish it with? Maybe there's plating or painting or things like that you start looking at as far as making that final part. Because eventually here we want to get to a stage that is going to be a full production part. And so these are the things we need to start looking at right from the beginning. Once you finish this step, we can move into some type of a pilot production. So inside of pilot production, we're going to go through and actually start building some of these parts to sell or to start, getting them out to a store or to a vendor or whoever your final market of this part is. And you're going to start learning a lot of things in pilot production, like hey, how do we assemble these parts correctly? How do we package them and label the parts? I mean, these are all things that are really important and you might overlook in the beginning, but as soon as you start producing these parts or thinking about producing them, these things really need to be incorporated in that design. For instance, labeling. This might be something you completely forgot about or don't even care about, but then, you're going to have some government entity that's going to say, hey, this has to have a CE label or UL label, and it needs to have this information to release it out. And so then you have to go back to your design from the very beginning and incorporate a place to put that label or a space that you're going to engrave it in or cut it in, or who knows where you're going to put it in there. But sometimes you got to look at these things in the beginning because it's going to save you a lot of headache down the road when you actually are required to incorporate things like labeling or even packaging, like thinking ahead what kind of box or package your final part's going to be put in the store or used out there is important because you might have to do some design work and some prototyping stages in the packaging as well to make sure that's going to work. So all these things are really important to think about in this workflow of how to get going. My recommendations is design something. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just get the key functionality of the part. Work through this stage a couple different times and start with the cheapest prototypes first. Print out a piece of paper that has the right size of the part to make sure you got those right things. Get out some crayons if you want or some markers and color it in to make sure that you've got the right look or the right color scheme. Do things that are very cheap in the beginning and simple to do. You can just do it with your local laser printer in your office there, and then move up to the process that are going to cost quite a bit more money in the long run. The prototyping process can be long and drawn out and sometimes very costly. However, if you carefully plan out the process and expect changes in the design, this can give you a leg up on getting the final production parts out the door and make your life so much easier.